Okay. I hope you all enjoyed your lunches. I'm going to continue the next session about Yelper. This session is going to be about adding some more interesting features to our website we've built this morning, and then also adding an API to that. So I'm going to start immediately with the demo because our website is missing some features. I'm switching to the demo machine. Okay, there we go. It's waking up. I have the project we have built this morning, and now there's an important feature missing, mainly registration. We want you to be able to make a Yelper account, so let's go ahead and implement that. I'm going to show some snippets this time as well. Remember, we have used some models already this morning. Jeroen has built a logon model. He has built that from scratch in C# code, and I have used an entity, the Yelp entity, as a model. Now for registration, we will need a model as well. We would like to use an entity, the user, because it's a logic thing to do, use the user as a model for the registration. But there are some problems with that. There are some things missing, like, for example, confirm password won't be in the entity, because of course you won't store the password twice in your database. That's redundant information. So that won't be in the entities, but we need that in our model for our view, because we want to have that field there. There's also the validation, which Jeroen has used in his logon model, so with the attributes like required. That won't be possible, because that isn't present in the entity user. So we will have to, in some way, add that as metadata to our model. I can go ahead and do that by adding a new class to this models folder. A new item. It's Visual C#. Then, okay, this is just a class. I can't call this user because user already exists in the automatically generated code of the entity framework. Set the keyboard layout to the right keyboard, and then let's call this user validation instead of user. User validation. Okay, enter. So I have this new class, and I can now go ahead and add my snippet. The model. Let me paste that in. So what I have here is, okay, I should resolve some using statements using this and using that. Yeah, system web MVC. So I have over here user validation, where I have this attribute bind exclude user ID. I will use this for validation, and we don't want to validate user ID because it's our primary key, so we exclude that. And then I have a partial class user. Now, a partial class is something in the .NET framework. It's not really object-oriented. It's not like overriding a class, but it's really splitting a class into parts. So you can have your class in several files. It's really interesting to use when working with auto-generated code, like, for example, the entity framework. We have the model that I've created this morning, database.edmx. Behind that, there's a file, database.designer.cs. That's the file that gets generated. So we could add to that. So we could really add our validation attributes in that file, but that wouldn't be very smart because, well, it gets generated when when Visual Studio designs to generate it, it gets generated, so our code changes would get lost. So that's why we use this partial class. And to the partial class, I have bound this metadata type of user validation. So I'm basically saying use this as metadata for the class user. Then I'm going to drag in another snippet. It just sets some fields, so some properties that we use of the model, the username, the email, the full name, and so on. And it sets some validation attributes to that. So, for example, the username is required. It has a maximum length. And then there's this one with a red line underneath it. It's a custom validator. So you can write your own validators. I've already put them in this folder. There are 3, so email, URL, and username. Username is basically saying there can be no spaces or no weird characters in the username, just some letters and numbers. And it's doing that using a regular expression. So I could just go here and write, regular expression, it's something like that. It's there is an attribute for regular expression. I could use that one. should have the right using statement, but I'm just using my own because it will be a lot cleaner, especially for things like email and URLs. Those are quite long regular expressions. It wouldn't be very clean to have them in this attribute. So I've created those, and then, well, if I resolve this, I can just use them. Take note that the class actually is called, for example, email attribute. So the attribute word means this will be an attribute. So I can use it as email over here without the attribute thing. Okay, so that's that for validation. Then we have some extra fields we want to add. The confirm password field, for example. I have those over here in a snippet as well. Oh, no, not that snippet. That's just to register the validation. It's in the global.asec, but it's already there. So it's validation extra is the name of the snippet. Well, let's copy it and paste it. Okay, so what I have here is 2 extra properties. For those of you who don't know a property, because I'm talking about properties all the time, it's like a getter and a setter in Java combined in one thing. So it's that's called a property. It's not a public field. It's really getter and a setter combined. So I have plain text password, confirm plain text password. The reason I have this plain text password is because in our entity, the password is actually a byte array. It's the hashed version. We can't bind that to our model because we can't really ask our user to type the hash instead of the password. So we do that by having plain text password here. And they are required. And there's the compare attribute actually says you should compare confirm plain text to plain text password. It's built in. Okay. Then there's one more thing that I'm not yet validating. If I take a look at the username, so okay, it's required. There are some illegal characters. It has maximum length. But there's something else, and I think you all know by now, it should be unique. It can't exist yet. But that's a little more complicated because most of these validators, actually all of them, also work with the jQuery validation. So at the client side, before you hit the button register or post or whatever, already when you're typing, there will be a validation message next to it. If you, for example, type an illegal email address, so without an ad or something like that. And you can't really do that if you've got to check something in the database. So that has to happen at the server side. But there's something built in for that. It's called a remote validator. So I can add an extra attribute here. And I have prepared it as well. It's this remote snippet. It just says, well, remote, and then there's the name of an action, the name of the controller where it can find that action. We'll put that in the Ajax controller and an error message. So this username is not available in this case. We already have the Ajax controller because I've used it this morning to add the method or the action Yelp. And I can now drag in my remote, or I'll copy it, that works better. Okay, so it's very straightforward. It's public JSON result, check username available, string username. And what this does, it goes to the database with a link statement. It checks whether that is available or not, and then returns that Boolean, true or false, in a JSON response, which is the JavaScript serialized object. So that will be true or false between brackets, and the jQuery validation will understand that. One interesting thing to note about this is the attribute over here, output cache. One username might be available this second, but not the next, so we don't want any caching to happen, so we say, please don't cache this. That's what this attribute takes care of. Okay, so what else do we need? Maybe a view, like a form where you can type your information and then hit a button. Okay, so in the view folder, we already have account over here. And I'm going to add a new view. Let's call it register. Register, it's strongly typed. We use the user as a model. It's not a partial view, and you can use the master layout. Add that, please. Dear Visual Studio. I have some snippets for that as well. Just the title, the model is still there. There's a title on the page, I'm new here. And then there's an if statement, We have this thing called the view data. In your controller, you can set the model, but sometimes the model isn't enough. So in this case, we'll have a user, but we would also like to have a Boolean where the controller can say, well, this was successful or this wasn't successful. The user is created or it isn't created. So we check if that is true. If that is true, we show this. Thanks for registering, and confirmation well was sent. Otherwise, we will show the form. So over here, I add the form. I'm going to use this. So remember this morning I used Ajax at the begin form. Not going to do this in Ajax because, well, it doesn't really it doesn't add any value to do that with Ajax. So I'm going to use just an HTML form, just like a form tag in the HTML. And then I can drag in my form items. That's just some, let's copy it. It's just some HTML codes with the razor syntax in it. So what we can do is we have the model. We can say, give me a label for the username. And if we take a look at the user validation, there's actually, at username, there's this display. So this has a display name. If we do label for, that will be a label with that display name. So that's easy to use if you're doing a website in multiple languages. You can have your own display attributes, like internationalized display, or it's even built in maybe. In some of those attributes, it's at least built in. And then we have a text box for that username property, and then we have a validation message. So if it goes wrong, it will display the validation message over there. And it's actually a span with a class, so in our CSS we said that that should be red. We don't do that in the HTML code, so to keep it clean. We have the same for the full name, then the email, the plain text password, and the confirm plain text password. I'll just hit F6 so this builds, and then those will be resolved as well. One more thing I need to add is, of course, a button. Should be resolved. Is a button. Oh, the namespace is wrong. Well, we'll see if that runs in a second. Then let's go to the controller, because when you hit that button, it will post to the controller. So we want that to work as well. It's in the account controller, and I'm going to add some. Going to copy it. Let's add it on top. It's again quite a lot of code in a snippet. Sorry for that, but it's again not really rocket science. So we have register, which just returns the view. So if you go to that action, it will just show you the form. Then if you get a post to that, it will get the model, so the user, as a parameter, and then it will go ahead and save that user in our database, but set the activated to false. Create a new ID, so a long string that's a unique ID. Save that as well in the database and save the user. The reason we do that is because we want to send out an email where you can click the link. So the link will be like yelper.be, if that would be your domain, / confirm, for example, / that ID, then your account gets confirmed. So that's why we create an ID over here. Then we send out an email. Now for sending emails, you can do that in many ways in .NET, but I've prepared a helper for that, and I'm also sharing that with you tonight. It has 4 methods to do email. We use Postmark, which is a website that allows you to do an API call to their service, and then they take care of the SMTP part of it, so you don't have to have your own mail server. Or if you do have your own mail server, you can just use SMTP in 2 ways. Or even if you're a company, maybe you can use Exchange, which works as well. So all the code for that is in this file. It's commented out, but you can uncomment the one you want to use. We are going to use Postmark. Now, usually you would go to the Postmark website and you would say, well, I'm using .NET, so I'm going to look for some code that I can use in .NET, and then you would find like a DLL. You would have to add it to your own references, then find what using statement to use. We are not going to do that. We have used a new feature in Visual Studio called NuGet. It's over here at package reference. Let's get rid of this. But we actually have already edited the package, so I can go to the NuGet official package source, and I can search over here for Postmark, but we'll see that it's already installed, because we weren't quite sure if we would have internet over here, so we've done that already. If there's internet, it will say, well, okay, it's over there, so it isn't installed. That's odd. Let's install it. Okay. That easy. So Postmark is over there. Okay. One more thing I want to do, I can already run this probably, because Jeroen has shown the global.asx file. Not changing the name of that. Okay. So there's the routes in there. There's the default route, which is controller/action. So this would already work with Yelp or domain/account/register. But it would be nice if it would be a short name, especially for the confirm. So we would like to have that ID in the URL, not like question mark ID is ID, just /confirm/the ID. So I can do that with some routes I have prepared as well. I have two routes, one for the, well, let's do that like that. One for register, so just /register will go to the account controller, the register action. And then there's one called confirm, which has confirm/GUID as a parameter. It will go to account confirm. Now, the controller that I've built has already also this confirm method, which takes this GUID as an argument. Okay, and what this does actually is simply setting the activated flag to true and saving that. The rest is checking whether the user exists and just very basic things. Let's try to run this. There were some build errors. Don't like to see that. Oh, probably the model. Okay. So I have this user validation. It's in yelper.web.models, but I want it to be in the namespace yelper.web, so it can find that. Okay, so far so good. I am new here. Didn't click. Okay. So does the validation work? Let's type my own. Okay, let's change it for the browser as well. The Vink, still my name. So now it should go, well, it did. So it went to the, with the remote validator, it went to our controller, it got to the database, which is on the local machine, that's why it's so fast. And it said, well, this username isn't available, so you can't register it. The Vink 2 probably will be available. My name is, for now, just some typing. My email address should be right, because we will send out a confirmation mail. It should be right, I said. Let's use my MSP techrep.com account. Then the password, okay, let's set that to tests. It's on the local machine, so no worries there. Okay, apparently confirmation mail was sent to me. So let's open a browser and go to, thank God for autocomplete to exist. Well, again, this email address. Maybe I should have picked something shorter for that. MSP Tech Rep. If you have any questions after this session, you can always contact me on either wouter.devink@gmail or this one. Let's not say my password out loud. And log on. Oh. Well, okay, I should have had that confirmation mail. But it's actually more interesting if I take one more look at the code, because what we've done in this account controller is over here. We've used this email helper, we've called the send mail method, and then we used this email template. I haven't discussed that yet, so let's do that instead of just typing. Why isn't there a stop button? Debug stop. Okay. So there's a folder resources. I've added a resources file to that. You can just do add new item resources. And it's actually a file with some strings in it. You can have images in there as well. For example, confirm body is a high 0 between some brackets, and then thank you, blah, blah, blah. The link with the ID is a 1. And then if we use that in the account controller, there's string.formats over here, and we fill in those missing parts of the template. So you can use that for internationalization as well if you want to have a website available in Dutch and French. So resources are very interesting to use for that as well. So you can try this out yourself. It's online on yelp.be. We will have the code up at Codeplex. So just take a look at that, and I'll now give the floor to Jeroen for some more demos about adding some features.
So thank you, Walter. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to close Walter's solution and I'm going to open another solution. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to create an autocomplete feature. So what we're doing now is when you have to yell up to a certain user, we have to type, and well, since Walter's name is pretty hard to type, you have noticed, we will implement some features just to get that going. So first of all, let's look back at what we have created before to Yelp. We go to our index users file. And there we've got our text area. So below our text area, we're going to add a div. And in that div, we're going to add some suggestions that we have. To these suggestions, we will get them using Ajax, of course. So we're going to edit our controller that we created before. So let's switch back to the Ajax controller. And the method itself is actually pretty simple. We use again the authorize statement because we only want to get any suggestions when we are logged in. And we are going to find users, and we are going to apply a filter. The filter will be the part that you already typed. So the method itself is pretty simple. What we do is we find out what user is signed in. If the user isn't signed in, well, we're going to return an error. When the user is signed in, we're going to find out what idols that user had, because we only autocomplete for idols, not for everyone. So it's just a standard link statement. When we haven't got any users, we're going to return a 405 error. What we're going to do with that error is we're going to catch it in our JavaScript file, and there we're going to process it with some specified behavior. And then we just return a model. So let's add a model. First I have to add a folder, because it's another file. It's in the Ajax. And I add the existing item. So files, Jeroen. And there we go. Let's open it up. So actually, this is a pretty straightforward view as well. It just renders a class called user suggestion, and we add an image, a name, and the username. So pretty straightforward, nothing fancy there. You should notice, however, the part here. At that part, we say, for this view, we won't have any master view. So we won't render the whole website, because, well, then we would paste the whole website inside the div, inside our website. I don't know what that would give, but it won't work anyhow. We just need to add another route. So going to the global.asx file. There we add a route. So every time we go to the route users and we add a filter, so some letters behind it, we're actually going to the Ajax controller, and in that controller, the users method that I created before. So for this project, we could use just the regular jQuery. But we're not going to use just jQuery. We're going to use Rx. Rx is something rather new. It has been invented by Microsoft, and it actually focuses on dealing with things that are asynchronous. So what if you want to deal with something that ain't just let's get it and wait for it? Because at this moment in time, most of the time we want to query a remote database, a remote web service, anything. Our application goes to the remote service and it has to wait. At that moment, your application is actually hanging. Rx will solve that for you. Rx will actually pull things from the cloud. So Rx will say, well, I'm listening to that service, and every time the service pushes something to me, then I'm going to react. We're going to react on just a simple event that the key up event is. So I already included the Rx files. The Rx files can be downloaded on the Microsoft website, so you should check it out. And I included them in my layout file. So here you can see the Rx file. I include as well the default Rx just assembly as the jQuery plugin that they have created. They also have plugin for other frameworks. So if you're using another framework, probably they will have a plugin. So moving to our script file. No, there's the Rx one. So this one. We already created this before. We have our text area, which has where we calculate how many characters we have left. And we're going to add actually the autocomplete function. And what it actually does is pretty simple. We listen to our text area and we turn it into an observable. Every time we get a key up event, it gets fired. When we fire it, we say we don't want the entire event. We don't want to be checking, is the event the same, isn't it? So we get a value that is fired from the event. So we actually get a value from the text area. Then we take that value and we return it, and then we apply a throttle function. Throttle is a function that Rx provides. It's also available in the standard links. So Rx is actually a link implementation that you can use using JavaScript. So the throttle function will actually wait for it. So we wait for 60 milliseconds before we actually send the request to the server. For instance, when Wouter's username is just @Wouter, it might be quicker when I just type @Wouter. So the actual implementation, for the rest, is pretty simple. We find out what the last word is that we typed. If it contains an @ and is bigger than 1 character, then we're going to do a request. The request, we just load the Ajax file, which returns just HTML. And then we check in the success part of the load method whether it has a 4 or 5, which means we don't have any users. At that point in time, we will just empty it and hide it because we don't have any suggestions to make. When we do have any suggestions, we'll slide down so it appears nicely. So let's just run this and see what happens. There we go. So when I log in, I can now type @Wouter. Oops, I don't have anyone that name. But one big problem is at this moment in time I can't click, so it ain't much helping. So I now can copy and paste, but it ain't pretty easy to use. So we're just going to add another function, and it actually uses the live method of jQuery. What we do is every time jQuery at any point in time finds a div with a class use suggestion, we will add a click event to that. When we click on it, we just find out on what suggestion we clicked. We find out what the yelp is without the add and the search part. We merge those two and we put them again in the text area. So running that and again logging in. Oh, shouldn't have done that. There you are. Whoops. So when I type now, I should type an @. Now I can click on it and it will autocomplete Wouter's name and I can just send the message. Whoa, there is a bug somewhere. Not sure where. Let's just reload for a moment. That's better. That's funny. Well, I actually don't have any idea where that bug is. Anyone? Okay, that's much of help. Okay, the first one who can help me gets an USB drive. Come on. Well, actually, I don't have any idea why it won't work. So I'll just switch to the next part of my demo. But I'll find out and I'll let you know what it is. So, moving on to our live version. On our live version, we have some pretty cool users at the moment. We have the NMBS, the Stubru and Facebook. I'm pretty sure these are all the real... Well, actually, Facebook likes us. Maybe they should buy us. So, I'm using IE9 just to show you a new feature that has been released with IE9. So, in IE9, we can see that we have some back and forward buttons that are colored. And when I right-click, I can see that I can view my mentions and I can see that I view my Yelps. So let's just log in first. It's kind of slow with the internet. So in the meantime, let's dive into the code while we are waiting for the internet to wake up. So how do we accomplish this? Actually, it's pretty simple. We just add some meta tags. So first of all, we have the nav button color. So we just add a color there, and that will make sure whenever you pin a website, the color will be applied to the back and forward buttons. Next, the icons to see the mentions and to do the Yelp. It's just another meta tag, which as name MS application task. And we just, as content, we just add a few parameters, including the name, the action URI, so where should we go whenever you click the button, and the icon URI. So what is the icon and what icon should I show actually? So in the meantime, I'm logged in. So when I click mentions now, it opens in a new tab, great. I should be redirected, as you can see here on top of the page, to the mentions part. So I will see all the mentions that they have made. So with that, we're going to conclude our website actually, and we're going to give the floor to Niels, and Niels will show you all about creating our OData feeds. So please give it up for Niels.
All right, I'm going to talk a bit about how we are going to create an API for Yelper application. We've chosen to create an OData feed. So what I'm going to do first is I'll close these things and just start up a Visual Studio application. I'll have to start it as an administrator because I will be using IIS. So let's just do that. Start it up. So for those of you who don't know what OData is, it's an open web protocol that allows us to query a database. Mainly it allows us actually to query data, but in most cases we'll use a database. But in such a way that we can really request the information that we really want, and it will return us an Atom feed in XML or JSON. So I'll just show a quick demo and how it works. There are a few big companies that already have an OData feed, one of which is Netflix. Another one is, for example, eBay. So there's a little program called Linkpad. You can download it on Codeplex, I guess. And Linkpad allows us to type in link. So link, you have seen it in Wouter's demo. And it will convert this link into, for example, into SQL or into OData for us, an OData filter. So let me choose here this OData.Netflix. If I click here, it will be polluting my data. So these are the collections that I can ask from the API. Now let me just type in some link. For example, I can say, let's say from G and genres, for example. Let's, what we don't do, I'll have to check how this is called. Let's g.name. I'll say where g.name, for example, that starts with, let's say B, for example. And then I want to order it by g.name, for example. Then I say just select G. So this is link. It's another way of typing link than Water did, but it actually does the same in the background. Let me just press here this run button. Now, it will return me a few results of this Netflix demo. And if I click here, this SQL tab, it's also called SQL, but it also shows me the OData URI. You see here genres, and then you see filter starts with name B. So it actually asks my database, so my API, I mean, give me all the names that start with a B and order them by a name. I could also, for example, say, give me the top 20, things like that. I can also just copy this, open up I9, for example, and just paste it in there. And you'll get my Atom feeds in XML. It can also return JSON if you want to. So I'm going to show you now how we can create this in the .NET 4.0 framework. So I already started my Visual Studio. I'll open up an existing project. It doesn't contain a lot. It's on my desktop here. The only thing it contains is the web.config, so a little bit configuration, and then this entity model that Water has showed you guys. So it's the same model as. So if you want to create it from scratch, you can just do File, New, Project. Then you can choose here an empty web project. But we don't want to do that. So, all right, what I got now also, I want to be able to add this OData, as I said. And the .NET 4.0 framework, we can implement this, using WCF data services. To do this, we can just do add and then new item. Now, here on the left, I have something called web. I hold down on the bottom, I have WCF data services. So let me just select that and then give it a name. Let's say Yelper data service, for example. So it will create a few files for me, add a few references. So it has created a .svc file. It's not that important. That file just has a single line, which basically says whenever this gets requested, this file, you have to do a service host, and you have to host my API, for example. It's not that important. The most important file is the CS file. It's the code behind file. And here we'll put our business logic, so what we actually want to do with our API. So you see that Visual Studio has said, I have to do a few things. Here it has C to do, and here you also C to do. First thing I have to do is I have to put my data source class name there. So this basically means that I have to say which data that I want to expose as OData. So in WCF here, we are going to use the entity framework for that. So it's called Yelper entities. This is this model here. And then what else I have to do is I have to set rules. This means that I have to say which data that I actually want to expose for the users and which I don't want. Or for example, if I want users to be able to add data, delete data or not. Let's just start by saying config.set entity, set access rules. And then I can say which entities do I want to expose. Let's just say I want to expose every one of them. And I want people to have all read access. This basically means that I only want people to be able to read data. It's in here, I guess. Okay. So this should work. Let's just start it up. It will start my ASP.NET development server. For now, we are going to use IIS a little bit later. And as you can see, we got our own API. So I can do, for example, users 1. Then I get myself here. And there are a few problems, one of which is you see my hashed password. Of course, this isn't very secure. And then another one is you see my email. So it's an ideal source for spammers, for example. So I want to get rid of these things from my API. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something that's called Entity Framework Split Table. What this basically means is that I'm going to split my table. So I have one table in the SQL database, and I'm going to split it up in multiple entities. So you see that you don't have to have a one-on-one mapping between your entities and your SQL database. So what I do is just copy-paste this. So I got the same user. For now, I'll just remove everything except for the user ID, the password, and the email. So let me just do that. Then here, I of course want to remove the password and the email, as I said before. So what I'm going to do is I'll expose this set, this entity, I mean. But I'm not going to expose this, but only use this for internal purposes. So I have to do a few things, of course, one of which is I have to add a mapping. So let's do that first. Mapping means I have to say these properties belong to these tables in my SQL database. So let's do here, select the users database. And as you see here, it automatically maps the properties with the same name in the database and the entity model. So this is done. Just rename it, for example, to user detail. Then I also am going to rename this set. You see what it is a little bit later, this set, I'll use it. So just call it user details. So now, of course, I also want to be able to, let's say, I have user and I want to do user.userdetail.password, for example. It's a lot easier than have to look up the user ID and things like that. So I have to add an association, it's called. Let's just click somewhere in the blank here, add, then I have association. And here I have to select two entities. So let's say here I have a user, there a user detail. There's always a 1-1 multiplicity between them. This means I always have a user and a user detail. So it's the same as in regular SQL. And let's just press OK. What you see now, it has created this relation between these two entities. And it has also created a navigation property. So I can say user.userdetails.password. Now I have to do one more thing, and basically is add a constraint. So this basically is the same as in foreign key in the SQL database and the entity framework. It's called a constraint. I can just do this by double-clicking here. Say principal is the user, and then this is my primary and my foreign key in the SQL database, for example. All right. So now that I have this, I have to do one more thing, of course, and I have to change my rules. So I want still every entity to be all reads, but I don't want anyone to be able to ask me the information of my user details. So let's say config.setEntity setAccess rule again. And this time here I have to provide this set name. So I've chosen user details. And let's say entity setRights.none. This means that you can't ask any of the data from the set. You can add it. You can do nothing actually on it. So let me start it up. Again, I get the same feeds, but if I go to use it now, I don't see my password and my email anymore. So this is what we want. And also if I do /userdetail, you see that it doesn't work. So it gives me 404 error. All right. Now that I have this, I of course want to be able to, let's say, I want to get my timeline. So with my timeline, I mean the timeline with all the helps of my idols and myself. Now, of course, if I want this, I have to add some sort of authentication. So if I first stop debugging here. So if I want that, I have to add authentication, as I said. So let's first create a new folder to group it a little bit. Authentication. And I have a little class that I am going to import. It's called basic auth authentication module. So from here on now, we are going to use IIS because this doesn't work in ASP.NET Development Server. This is actually an IIS module. So what it will do, it will be run for every HTTP request that we get. For those of you who don't know what IIS is, it's a web server with Microsoft technology. So what I'm going to do, I just scroll a bit through it. It's fairly simple, this thing. It's just really boring code. So here I have an HTTP request that comes in. I'll parse the header. So the header contains something called basic, then username and password. So I parse it into a username and a password. Then what I'm going to do next is here, this get principal will get called. It will parse my header, as I said. And then I will just check this username. I'll say from from my database users, I want to select my users where the username is the username that was provided, and where the user is actually activated. I want to select one if he exists that I'm going to return a principal. So a principal is an object that I'll be using later on, and this principal has the user's name, the user his name. Otherwise, I'll just return an empty principal. All right, so I got that. Now, of course, I have to be able to load this into my IIS server. Luckily, since .NET 4.0, we can do this in our web.config file, so we don't have to go to the IIS manager. So I just open it up here, and I have a little snippet. Just look where it is. It's here. So I'll paste it there. It's in the system.web server. So this is to configure my web server. And I'm going to add a module. It's called custom basic auth module. So this is this module. This was custom basic auth module. All right. So what I'm going to do now, as I said, is I have to run it in local IIS web server. So I'll do this. You see here there's a little thing called IIS Express. It's an Express web server, so it's a tiny web server, let's say, but it can do all the things that IIS can, but it's used for development purposes only. If I do this, I don't have to run my Visual Studio in administrator mode. I've chosen you guys just to show it how we would do it with a regular IIS web server. All right, so of course I have to say I have to create a virtual directory. It says it was successfully created, so it will create this on my IIS server. It's actually on this PC here. And let's just save that one up. All right, so I got my module. Now I want to be able to check whether or not the user is authenticated. If he isn't, I'm going to return a response which says, hey, you have to authenticate. So again, a snippet. Just, oh, not that. Just paste it in there. This is rather a long snippet. Again, I'll scroll through it to show you guys what it actually does. So it starts by checking whether or not the current user, his entity name is set, or if the current user is null. If this is null, it means the user wasn't authenticated. So I'll just return a 401 HTTP response which says, hey, you have to authenticate using basic auth. So we use basic auth in this case. It's not very secure, of course, if it isn't run over SSL, but it's just for demo purposes, so it doesn't matter a lot. So, and it's very easy to set up an SSL, of course, in IIS. So you see also they have to do a few usings. Let me just do that first. All right, so I got this function called check user authenticated. If I'm not authenticated, it will return a response. Otherwise, it will just return. So I'll have to call it from my timeline. This is the function I want to create with all the helps that are in my timeline. So I'll start by saying check whether or not the user is authenticated. If he isn't, I'll just return this, as I said before. If he is, I know that there's a user, so let's select his username. This is what this does. I want to select the user from a database. And then I'll say user.idols.select many, and then a whole function. This basically says this piece takes all the helps of my idols. So it will transform this into SQL. And this piece concatenates that with my own helps, because I want to be able to see my own helps in my timeline. Then I say I'm going to return it as queryable. If I don't say this, it will just return my helps in an ordinary array, and I won't be able to query through it. So always add as queryable. But if you don't want it, for example, if you always want users to be, for example, ask 10, and you don't want them to be able to say I only want 2, then you just return it as an enumerable. All right, so we got that. One more thing left to do, set rules. So we got something else called service operation access rules. This sets the rules for my custom operations. And also notice here, I got this little attribute. This basically says you have to export this, you have to make this function visible for my API. So this function isn't visible. It's not because I, for example, make it public, it will be visible for other users. I have to put webget in front of it. So I'll just remake it private. All right, so let's say I'm going to set my timeline to be all read also. So I got that one, just start it up. And now it will deploy this to my IIS. As you can see here, localhost, not anymore this ASP.NET development server. And when I do my timeline, it will first give me an exception here because it returns an exception, and the real-time application won't do this because I'm running in debug mode now. Just press F5, and then it will show me this dialog from IE9. I can just type in my username, my password, and I'll get my feed. So we basically got authentication now in an OData API. Now, there's one more thing I want to be able to do, of course, and that is actually to be able to add the helps through my API. So again, I will be needing to change my, remember these access rules. Now I don't only want to be able for people to say all reads, I also want to be able for them to add something to my table. So I'll change the access rule of the helps. So let's say set entity access rule, say Yelps, and then I'm going to say, write append. So this means I can only append it, so I can't delete, for example, or edit in Yelp. And then I also want still people to be able to all read. Don't forget to add this, or otherwise your API will only be able to add Yelps and not request any Yelps. So I got that one. One more thing to do. You can only add Yelps, of course, if you are authenticated. Otherwise, it would be quite silly. So again, little snippet. Paste it in there. And this is something called a change interceptor. This basically gets called right between you send the request to my API receives it, and then this change interceptor gets called right before it goes to my data source. So I can do all kinds of stuff here on the data that the user provided me. So what I want first is I'm going to check whether or not the user is authenticated. It's the same function as before. Then I'll just check if the update operation was actually an add. It should always be an add, of course, but I'll just show you guys how you could check it if you, for example, allow multiple things like edit, append, but you want to do different things depending on the situation. And then, again, I'll select the user. So I'm doing this before, for example, if someone else is authenticated with my API, he can set the user himself. So he would be able to, let's say, I'm going to Yelp in somebody else's name. Of course, I don't want that, so I'm going to set the user myself to be sure that it's the user that is authenticated. And then I'll just set the Yelp date to datetime.utc now. Actually, my SQL Server database does this also, so I could remove it if I want to. All right, so just start it up again, and it should still run. I won't be showing you guys how we could add Yelp in this session, because I would have to do an HTTP post. It would be quite a lot of typing also, and I'll just show it in the phone session, because most of the time you won't be doing the HTTP request yourself, but you will be using some kind of wrapper around it. So I'll show that in my phone session. So this basically concludes how we can create an API using OData. You also saw that I had this Yelper data service.svc. I could also change this by adding a global.asix file. It's in Codeplex. Codeplex will be online shortly. We will say when Codeplex is online, actually. Normally it should be this evening, probably. And this will rewrite my URI, so I can just say, for example, ap.yelper.eu, and I don't have to say /Yelper data service. All right, so this concludes my demo of OData.